Welcome to another Salt Baked Patient Profile, Pam Harrison.
Yes.
It's good to have you with us. So for those of us out there in the green scene who do not know you, Pam, could you tell us a little bit about your cannabis recovery tale, how you came to cannabis?
Well, I came as an activist, and it started when it first went through the state legislation when Senator Mark Madsen tried to get it through in 2015, and they didn't get it because it was too close to the end of the session. But that's when there started to be local news, and I'm sure I saw Christine Stenquist on the news, and really piqued my interest. And so I started following what was going on at the state capitol, and then all through the next session in 2016 when it didn't make out of the House chamber.
Understood.
So during that time, what I took upon myself, this was kind of the hidden, quiet involvement that pushed the story along. But I would look up the videos for each one of the floor debates and whenever it was being presented, and I would copy those links, and I probably sent it off to a random selection of about 40 friends of mine to let them know what was on the radar and what was going on. And it must have been in the summer of 2015 or going into the fall, between those two efforts to submit it through the regular legislative body, that Senator Madsen, Christine Stenquist, I remember Sam Gill was there. I believe there was a doctor, and it's the first time I ever saw Connor Boyack and the Libertas organization. But they had going around the state public presentations, hearings, where people could show up and hear what they were trying to pass and ask questions. That happened. The one I went to was at Weber State. And what
made you so curious, Pam? I mean, had you become a patient, or had you needed to become a patient? So this was all before that.
No, I was never in this during the whole activism on my own behalf as a patient. And it was at the very end that I decided, yeah, I qualify. I should get me a damn card.
Oh, I see.
And,
okay.
But no, it was always because I am aware of medicinal value for medical cannabis. I'm a social worker. And I often had people tell me, my clients tell me, that they were self-medicating with cannabis. And the way I look at that is, if somebody tells me directly their story of what the impact is on them, their own observations about how much it benefits them, yes, that is not a double-blind medical evaluation and trial, but I put it above just, it's not anecdotal. I don't like that word when it's I call it testimony. When it's directly from one person's experience and they're explaining how much it benefits them, I put more credence on that than me telling you this story of somebody else. And so I had so many patients that had that, that gave me that information. And this is mostly for the things that aren't covered.
Really? For instance, Pam, could you share with us what those conditions are?
Depression, anxiety, insomnia. The only things that fall within the mental health realm that we got into the bill is autism and PTSD. And so we don't have those other elements in there yet. In addition to that, I have a great niece and her partner. Both have bipolar disorder, and they were living in Utah during this time. And I saw the tremendous change and their discussions with me about how they could regulate their mood disorder when they had access to cannabis. And so I saw it right up close and personal in front of my own eyes how when they would fight like cats and dogs, and when they'd get where they had a steady supply of cannabis, it was much calmer household. And so, it's my own observations. And so when this came along, and I watched it progress, the 2 failures in the state capitol, which we were really hopeful that it would have passed that second time. That was rather harsh defeat for everybody that I was observing that was heavily involved in it.
What did you see? What did that disappointment look like for the patients, your clients?
Well, I don't know that I had any discussions directly with them. What I'm referring to is all the work that Christine Stenquist, Truce, and Doug Rice, and EAU, the Epilepsy Association of Utah, and the citizen involvement. I wasn't down at the state capitol at that point. I was sitting up in Weber County doing what I could do from my cozy little home.
Right.
But
are you a Utah resident? Is this where you're from, Pam?
Oh, yeah, born in Utah and lived here most of my life. I have been out of the borders.
Copy that, right?
And so, I just at that point, it seemed like the state capitol was 100 miles away, and that I was, even though it's not, it's a 35, 40-minute drive. Right. I wasn't all that motivated to get up there at that point. But I do remember when they said that they were going to start an initiative process, that I was profoundly disappointed that it didn't happen in 2017, that they waited until 2018 to kick that off.
Why so disappointed? Is this simply because your family, I mean, you saw the great benefit? And
for the state of Utah, I think it needs to be descheduled. It needs to be decriminalized, and even I'm not opposed to legalization, although that's not my battle. My heart was in medical cannabis, so I was fully within that realm, comfortable fighting with all my grit. So what really changed in my level of activism by the time the initiative came out, and I was watching with an eagle eye at that point.
Had you ever taken up citizen advocacy or lobbying?
Yeah, I do have a history of it.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that, Pam.
Okay, so I was thinking about that this morning before getting on this call, just kind of my background overall. And my first big point of advocacy was during the battle for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I was involved in the Weber County National Organization for Utah, or for women. And first we had our Weber County chapter, but then we just went to a Utah coalition. And, I held every office in that organization and up to ultimately state coordinator at the end when it got defeated. And that was just a spirit crushing. I don't think I've ever recovered from that defeat. The correlation or the similarity is I laid the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment, the last 3 states that we couldn't get, squarely at Temple Square. That was Mormon intervention, in my opinion, that prevented the last 3 states from ratifying because of the way they rallied, and there were things that happened that were really unsavory, loading up busloads of Relief Society women to go to the International Women's Convention that was in Salt Lake at the Salt Palace. I didn't attend that, and I regret not being there, but I've heard lots of stories from people who were there about what happened that day. And so Yeah, that's kind of an eerie similarity with the kind of opposition. It was much milder in this case. I mean, people complain about the compromise, and we can talk about that if you want to in a bit. But after that, I've always been politically interested and always had an eye out for what's going on politically. The next time I was in something that I'm really proud of and put a heart and soul into was when I was a student at Weber State, the second time when I went back and finished up my bachelor degree. As I consider myself the student catalyst. I was the person on campus that organized the successful effort to establish the women's studies minor on campus. And that had to go through the faculty senate. So yes, it was a political endeavor. It was a different political body. But I worked on that as I was finishing up my degree. And then when I got into grad school, I ended up back on campus
at Weber.
At Weber State, in my second year practicum, the year that the faculty senate passed it, and my mentor on campus
Prop 2 we're talking about, right?
Pardon?
We're talking about when they Prop 2 passed?
No, I'm talking about women's studies.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I was just getting a time frame. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm back to my clearest victory was my mentor on campus made a special invitation and made me attend the faculty senate when they passed it so I could be part of the celebration. And she took me out for drinks later, and it was just a lovely, lovely day. And so, that I consider one of the real feathers in my cap of having done something that mattered and that altered things. So when this came around with the initiative, by that time, as my previous story tells you, I was really primed and I was watching for this. I had already contacted the Utah Patients Coalition online and said, I want petitions. I want to collect signatures, get a hold of me. And I didn't hear anything from them. Let me fill in the very busy time that happened just prior to those hitting the streets, though, because I believe those came out the summer of 2017 is when we started that signature gathering, if my dates are right. But once again, I leapt into political action around January of 2016. I'm a huge advocate for single payer, socialized medicine. I don't care if universal health care, I don't care how you label it. I see medical care as a human right. And I've worked with indigent poor people my whole life. I've worked for nonprofits, and I've literally seen clients die because of lack of medical assistance. And so there was a rally up at the state capitol to defend the Affordable Care Act. And I went to that rally. It was on a Sunday afternoon, I believe, with my signs and do my protest thing. And it was a very uplifting rally. And I came back to Ogden and zipped right over to, I accepted an invitation to attend a planning meeting about, oh no, Trump got elected, what are we going to do? And in that meeting, I stepped forward and took on the responsibility of organizing and being the coordinator leader of Indivisible Ogden. And so from that point on, I was deep into kind of the real politics kind of action. That winter, when summer came, that first summer in 2016, a dear friend of mine and some other people in the organization, but one person, Angela Urea in particular, went with me every single Saturday from June through October down to the farmers market, and we registered people. Now, we were nonpartisan during that effort because you can't collect signatures and try to sway people. And so I'm a huge advocate for voting. I think if I have my
Gotcha.
voted, and I want everybody to vote. I don't, it's an American right and a duty, and so even if I'm signing up people that they're not going to agree with my politics, I want people to exercise that, and so devoted to that. I did that all summer long. We went to the balloon festival. I went to the Comic-Con. I went to different places. If there was an event going on, we tried to be there. We went to high schools. So for 2 full summers and the year in between and beyond that, we organized. And so I had this group, Indivisible Ogden, that I could call upon and say, hey, I need volunteers. Let's be here. Let's go. And we would organize these groups of people to help register voters. So we were a common site down with our register to vote here signs. Mm-hmm. and we had a steady stream of that. The second year, 2017, I believe it was about July or August. It seemed like it was later in the year. I heard that somebody was down 2 blocks away with the Cannabis initiative. Mm-hmm. And I went down there and they had packed up and gone. And so the next Saturday, I went there as soon as we got set up. I went searching for them. And I still hadn't heard directly from UPC, but here was a table with some volunteers with packets in their hand. And I said, you have to give me a packet, you have to. And I had to pry it away. It was like, I am not leaving without the ability to start collecting signatures. And so from that time on, we married the effort to register voters and get the initiative, because that was a nonpartisan activity. Mm-hmm. The initiative was not a partisan thing. And we actually ended up collecting signatures on all the initiatives that year. So we'd have this whole table full of petitions. Mm-hmm. and again, from June until October, when it was freezing outside, in November, December, we were down at the Christmas display in Ogden. And so it was dogged, routine, absolute effort. We found this honey spot in Ogden over on Riverdale Road that was easy for cars to pull off and get back on. We tried going to Layton. We tried setting up clear out by Smith and Edwards in Ogden. We tried different locations on Washington Boulevard. Mm-hmm. And this place in Riverdale with our big signs by then. And we'd march up the street and we had flags and people would see that Prop 2 and they'd make us turn around and they'd come back. And we collected so many signatures that Alex from Utah Patients Coalition identified that there was a real organization up here overperforming. Mm-hmm. And so he contacted me and a friend of mine, Micah Medford, and he kind of christened this. He didn't, there was no formal name to it, but I felt like he made us Weber County deputies or team captains or something. Mm-hmm. And so he started delivering the petitions and the signs directly to us. And then I got very friendly with the elections office here in Ogden, mm-hmm. because I'd march in these mountains of signatures over and over.
Who
And
specifically had you worked with most?
at the office, it was Daniel Wade. Daniel Wade is just the most kind-hearted, informative guy. I am so proud to have him in our elections office. And he taught me so much about registering voters, all the peculiarities of what if they're homeless? Oh, felons can vote? Yay, let's sign up anybody who's not incarcerated.
Sure.
And so I learned so much from him. And we did overperform in Weber County. We got to a point where we had maxed out the amount of signatures that we needed for the county, that he quit counting them. They all got turned into the state, all the signatures, but he didn't need to make sure that we made that mark anymore.
So Pam, do you consider yourself a canna lobbyist?
A
Cannabis?
what?
A canna lobbyist. See what I mean? A cannabis lobbyist?
No, because then it progressed after. Oh, and I do want to say that, the UPC, both DJ Shantz, who I met pretty much the last 2 weeks of the before they had to be turned in, the deadline of April 15th. Alex called and said, would you be willing to go to Summit County? We need somebody in Heber City. And I said, oh, hell yes. And so my niece, Micah, myself, and Tiffany Mallow went to Heber City and spent 2 weekends on the big corner there with our signs and regalia, and helped get Summit County over the edge. They had another team working in Park City, but we took on the Heber City part, and it was a blast. We were so jubilant, and we knew we were making a difference, and that we were really, really close to getting our necessary 26 counties. And we indeed made it to 27 counties. So we gave ourselves a 1 county buffer, which came to, and the second county was Washington County, barely made it over. And it was one of my indivisible friends who was vacationing down there, who got in 300 or 400 signatures right at the end that put them over the top.
And these are signatures from people that were in support of this.
Yep. And so then we had kind of a little quiet period between April and then when we finally got it on. We knew we made the ballot.
What did that feel like?
Oh, jubilant. It was just absolutely great. And then we voted on November 6th, and UPC threw a fabulous celebratory watch party for the results to come in. And I just drank too much and danced too much and listened to the results. Weber County was, I believe, the first county declared a victory. And I screamed in the hall, that's my county, that's my county.
In this fight to make cannabis recovery available to all Utah people, who are some of the people you admire most, Pam? The people you've worked with, the movers and influencers that have been integral in this process?
Well, I didn't get much out of the Utah Patients Coalition. I consider that the group that I'm most aligned with. It's the group that I did the blood, sweat, and tears for, and the hard footwork for months and months getting the signatures.
So did you work closely with Desiree?
I do now.
You do now.
And since she took over UPC, once we folded this phase of it, and we had the victory, now I have the pleasure of considering Desiree one of my friends. I knew who she was, prior to her taking over that lead role. But now I'm in service to her. Anything she needs, I will be there. And this is when it shifted after November 6th, when we had the great victory. It was a subdued victory, though, because we only got about 53%. We only needed a majority to pass it statewide. Once we got that, let's see, the math changed dramatically between that narrow majority, which was tamped down by many things that the LDS Church did, and I think people being mad about the compromise, but there were, the polls had gotten us up to over 70% of Utahns.
What specifically was the compromise?
What was the compromise?
Could you outline that for us?
Out August, September, if my memory is right. And there's many sour feelings in Utah about what is perceived to have been given away from Prop 2 to it becoming codified. An initiative, I learned so much about the legislature and our political processes by being upfront and personal with this. That an initiative is not a law. It has to go through the legislature after the people say this is what we want. It has to be given the code and put in the code book. And so even if they'd written it exactly, the legislature still had to approve it. But what we were facing at this time, and I will say that this is my perspective, other people have different perspectives. But what we were facing after we had the victory was an anti-campaign with a lot of money left. The Utah Medical Association, the Walter Plum III, who was the biggest donor against it. There were a couple of law enforcement organizations, but they had a press conference where they literally lined up some millionaires and said, we are against this. And there were some things that I heard started circulating among LDS church members. And that's when our high approval rating started taking a dive. And this was before the vote. It was late, it was fall. And UPC didn't have a lot of money still coming in. We had blown the budget on getting those signatures, and it was exhausting. Sure. And we were outgunned at that point. So if the compromise hadn't been this agreement that they would knock off their anti-campaign, because they were ready for billboards and television ads and things we couldn't have competed with. There wasn't funding left for us to do that. I believe that it would have been defeated. And this is what I kept trying to get across to people. Well, that's farther on. There were certain things put in the you ask for more than what you want, so you have something to bargain with.
Sure.
And I guess the sticking point for a lot of people is the elimination of home grow. What I say to those folks is go back and read Prop 2. You weren't going to be able to grow. It was so specifically written that it wouldn't be until January of 2021, after the industry got established, and you would have to live more than 100 miles away from the nearest dispensary pharmacy, which they changed the language of. And you would have to not live in a residential zone. And if you did, you would have to have an enclosed shed with electricity to grow outside of that area. So there would be very, very few people that maybe if you lived in Dutch John or Yost or Big Water, and that would be with Prop 2 would have still been in that condition. Of course, it was based on how many dispensaries got open by then, and we are in a problem with that. But it was latched onto by a lot of people as though people along the Wasatch Front were going to be able to have it in our gardens. It was not that.
So it never was on the table.
Not that.
So what are you currently doing to make that happen?
To make what?
Well, I imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Pam, I'm wondering, are you currently actively lobbying as a citizen lobbyist to...
Well, the legislature's not in session right now.
Right, but I mean, in the back alleys, in the back channels, I mean, I'm sure you're preparing for this, right?
Yeah, I'm putting together my wish list of things that, you know, we accomplished a lot with our first legislative session in January to March of this year. We knocked out some critical things, and I was really, really happy with what we accomplished. And I was part of that. So let me tell you about actually being at the state capitol, because this part of it is what I want people to understand, is that anyone in the state can get to know their legislator.
Sure.
Anyone can do this. November 6th, we got the results back and we knew it was going to be on the ballot. November 24th, which is the Saturday after Thanksgiving, on a snowy day, I put together a think group, an exchange up here in Ogden at one of the libraries. And I invited a panel of people to come up so that citizens could get this skinny on what happened now that it's passed and going into law. And the person I was directed to from the legislature to invite lived in Logan. He's no longer a legislator. He's Dr. Ed Red. And he was so gracious and so fabulous. He drove down on that snowy day and addressed every single question we came up with our other panel members, stayed after the meeting and answered more questions. He probably spent at least 2 hours with. We had a smaller turnout than had said they would come because of the snowstorm. But I still think that was really critical. Monday, after that, was the last public meeting with the Health and Human Services Committee to do some final decision making, because they had already announced they had this compromise bill and they were prepared to pass it. And we got one last chance to have public input. And that was an overflow. The other meetings I had attended prior to this had been quite small, but this attracted hundreds of citizens, where they had to use an additional room with a monitor system so they could hear what was going on. And I was upset with the PTSD part of it. And being a social worker, that's the one that was mine. And so I had prepared comments about what they needed to modify in allowing patients with PTSD diagnosis to make it all the way through to getting something from the
pharmacy.
And
these are people you work frequently with, is what you're saying, Pam?
Well, throughout my career, I have. I used to specialize in domestic violence, so I work with PTSD all the time.
Right.
And now it's more uncommon, although it's people with that condition still crop up. But it's certainly, mental health within my realm. And what the legislators had come up with, and Ed Red had tried to, I told him my concerns, and he reported back to me that he gave it his most valiant effort to modify it. And so I gave testimonies because they had restricted it. They'd made this convoluted mess for people, particularly veterans. It was kind of two-tier. If you were a veteran or if you were a non-veteran, what you'd have to go through to get to the golden prize of a card. And they had restricted the diagnosis to only come from a psychiatrist, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, or a PhD psychologist. And I took absolute offense to that because I'm an LCSW, which means I'm at a master's level. That's where most of your therapists are. We're the ones in the trenches. We're the ones that deliver the care for people at an affordable rate on a consistent basis. The veterans, they had said that they could take documentation of their diagnosis from any mental health worker. So that could be somebody doing your intake. I mean, they listed no credentials for people going through the VA, but the VA cannot do this because of its scheduling. And so that person would have to take that diagnosis and yet go into the community health system to go to a QMP. And it was just an extra unnecessary hurdle. But when I testified, I said, sir, we use the same diagnostic manual. We use the exact same criteria, and it's basically a checklist. Do you have this symptom? How many of these symptoms do you have? How many of these do you have? You do a narrative with them and find out what they're struggling with to decide if they meet the criteria.
Right.
And I said, you're telling me, even though I worked for the Air Force and I took the certification for PTSD training, that I'm not qualified to do this? And in addition to that, my office partner is a retired lieutenant colonel. He got his PhD in social work. So he's a doctor of social work. And you're telling me this person with all the affinity for military personnel and knowledge of military is not qualified to give a diagnosis? Based
what
on,
happened? Go ahead.
They added PhD social workers, but they still left me out and all my colleagues.
Right. So what is the general feeling, I mean, between you and your colleagues, Pam, at this point, as a lobbyist and as a professional social worker? What's next?
I think that, we corrected that in the next legislative body.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2019, that's one of the corrections we made, and you now can go to an LCSW. Yay.
Good. All right.
And so for me, I try to disseminate and make myself available. I belong to a couple of listservs and organizations of therapists. Mm-hmm. And I have written long descriptions. Okay, people are going to be coming to you asking for your card, because that's the other hiccup in getting your diagnosis for PTSD from me. I can't give you a card because I don't have the medical credentials. So you get the diagnosis from me, and then you still have to go to a QMP.
So long story short, Pam, it seems like one of the things that we're describing here is there's simply too many unnecessary hurdles between a patient who has medical needs and access to medication.
Well, in PTSD, the rest of them don't have these extra hoops.
I see.
The PTSD has the paragraphs of this. So I want it to just say PTSD, like any other else,
Sure.
that if you're ever diagnosed PTSD, you have to go to a QMP like anybody else, but you don't have to have these hoops. It's too freaking complicated and stupid.
Right. Right. So what's next on the agenda for you as a citizen lobbyist in the cannabis scene, Pam?
Well, I certainly hope that we are able to be up at the state capitol again, and I will be there. I will be providing testimony again, or comments, public comments again, and working with UPC in whatever capacity that they see a use for me. I do gather research. I've got a couple of people that are really, really good at that, and we collaborate. And so if there's something that they need that we give to the legislators to say, you don't have to just think it's okay, here's some evidence. And this comes to that double bind of we can't research it because it's Schedule 1, and yet they don't want to, they say it hasn't been researched.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, it's not like Canada's our next door neighbor or anything, right?
Or Israel hasn't been doing this for decades, but it's still really tricky to find those studies. It really is.
I think generally the thing I hear most is that people recognize that cannabis works. However, the very specifics of why are as yet unclear.
Yeah, and let's deschedule it so we can properly study it with your double-blind studies and go for it. California's been doing their shadow research, for years too, because they've hired firms in order to do that. And so let's break that open. Yes, that's absolute. So yeah, I remind people that's national. You have to pay attention who's on the national ballot. You have to put pressure in Washington in order to get the descheduling done, or it's just a fact. And if you're boo-hooing about that in Utah politics, that's misplaced. That you can't do anything about that here. You have to look at the Utah law. I'm really pleased that we were state number 32, not 50. My mind is blown that Utah has medical.
I don't think you're alone, Pam. I don't think you're alone at all. I think we're experiencing growing pains. Honestly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's miserable. It's harsh. There were 14 pharmacies approved, and we've got 5, 6 now. Where are the other 8? Get on the ball. The year's almost over. Didn't they give them a deadline? What's going on there? And then you have to step back and remember that you have to grow everything. Everything has to come from ordering your supplies and finding your facility and hiring your workers, and the crops take a while, and then it has to be tested. There's a lot of layers.
Well, and add to that, in delaying the testing, that means the quality of the medicine arrives, it's not as potent. It dries out, it loses some of its quality in all that testing time.
But thank God we got rid of blister packs.
That seemed kind of silly. I have a question for you, Pam. And an aside, as we wrap things up here, because we're running out of time because of Zoom. I'm curious to know, how has your life as a citizen lobbyist improved your work, or enhanced or complemented your work as a social worker?
Well, I regularly counsel my clients who are curious. I wear my pin every day that I work. And if I were in my office, I actually made myself a little poster in my office that says, "Ask me about medical cannabis." So I make myself right up front available. Since I'm working from home, it's social media. I have people contact me all the time. I'm pretty well known for this, for having a knowledge base. I do my very, very best to stay factual about what the law actually says, not what people think it says, and to counter people's mythology or misconceptions, and to try and put out fires.
What is one of the most common misconceptions that you experience?
Oh, it's the home grow, no doubt.
That can or cannot, or when is it going to happen? What's the big
Yeah,
question?
and it's that we want Prop 2. We want to grow our own. We want Prop 2. Give me Prop 2. I want my Prop 2. And it seems really childish to me from my perspective, because like I said, it was not in Prop 2. If you go back to Prop 2, all these people who are whining would not be eligible for this to happen.
What's your position on home grow?
I would love it. I grow tomatoes every summer.
Oh, cool.
And so, I'm that's one of my hobbies is gardening, and I think that it's a plant.
Well, as a social worker, would you agree also that gardening has
it has therapeutic
spiritual
value.
and psychic benefits, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it would help people who are struggling to afford the prices, and it would help. And other states are doing it with a medical model to say you can have 6 plants or 2 plants or something.
Right.
And so, yes, I'm absolutely in favor of adding that. Do I think Utah's going to do it? No, I
Really?
don't think so. I don't think so. Not unless we have people get active and replace some of these folks on Capitol Hill in Utah. I'm not talking about Washington. I'm talking about our Capitol in Salt Lake.
Right.
If we get rid of some of these people that have been there way too long, and it's just a fact. The Democrats have almost no power because there's so few of them. And it's mostly old white men up there that belong to the LDS church. Now, I'm not bashing LDS. I grew up LDS, but it's a fact that we've got an overrepresentation in our legislature, and our population has changed dramatically. And I harped for months before we got into election season, run for office. Make sure that you talk somebody into running for office if you don't have the personality for it.
Are you going to run for office, Pam?
Yeah, it seems hypocritical, but I am not.
Not hypocritical, but I do have a fun question for you.
Sure.
So with all of this wonderful Utah flower being cultivated and provided to Utah's patients, which do you prefer? What strains are your favorite?
Well, quite frankly, I'm not finding for my particular condition, which is chronic pain, that the flower is providing me the relief I wanted it to. I've tried about 4 or 5 strains now. I'm willing to continue with seeing if I hit the magic one. What I have found most effective for me is the creams that I can apply directly to my joints. And that discovery came when I volunteered at the Utah Cannabis conference. And I got something from Colorado that had THC in it.
Oh, yeah. So is your cream the THC CBD combo, or is it just one or the other?
Yeah, combo. And I had tried all the CBD samples that they would give me at the conference, because we can THC products there, obviously. And the CBD did not work for me, just didn't. And when a friend gave me some Colorado cream, it was mind blown. And that really is when I started thinking, get a card, this works. Because my feet were just on fire and killing me. I went to bed that night with that Colorado cream without the blanket hurting my feet. I jumped out of bed in the morning and I didn't, crawl across the floor limping along.
So which Utah cream are you currently using?
I've only tried one, and it's the Dragonfly, and it doesn't compare to what I got out of Colorado.
So let's
So
hope for improvement there as
for
well.
more formulations, for other things to come out. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, Pam Harrison, patient advocate, social worker, cannabis medical card holder, thank you so much for being with Salt Lake City today. We're also very grateful for all the effort you've put on behalf of Utah's patients.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. You have a fabulous day.